bright and early. 10 o'clock's bright and early to me. And I have to actually be up a little bit earlier than that because I actually have to get ready. So this is bordering into 8 o'clock or something. I mean, this is craziness. So anyway, we're going to be getting into some pretty deep detail here this week. I feel that there's a lot of skepticism regarding the biblical text, and a lot of people that seem to think that it's fantasy or made up or fiction. It's a good word for it, yes. Yet when you're trying to document an ancient document, when you're trying to document when it was and prove that it was real, that the people actually saw what they were writing about, there's different ways of doing that. And especially when they're looking at it from 1,800 years ago or 2,000 sometimes, you have to dig a little bit deeper to figure out whether this is true or not. And as I think we're going to cover today, we've got some strong documentation that, in fact, when the Bible talks about things, it is talking about things that really existed. And I think we're going to go into that today. But if we are dealing with skeptics, and we deal with skeptics a lot these days, at least I do anyway. I'm sure you guys run into them as well. But how Jesus dealt with skeptics. I wanted to read something that we went over at our Bible study. Some of you guys have already heard this, at least 3 of you, but some haven't. So anyway, this is where I wanted to start. So, and if you've got your Bibles with you, it's Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 18. That may sound familiar to 3 of you. We studied this on Thursday, but I just came up with a different take on it. So anyway, as we open up there, we'll see that the Sadducees were getting after Jesus about some things, and they're making up this hypothetical situation that we often hear about when they say, well, you Christians, you believe that this, that, and the other thing. And some of the stuff they say was, you would think the earth is flat, for example. You Christians all think the earth is flat. Well, I don't know a Christian. Well, actually I do, sorry, but I know very few Christians that think the earth is flat. And there's reasons for that. But they'll come up with stuff like that. And I personally see that what the Sadducees were bringing up here in this chapter is very similar to that. So anyway, let me just read it to you guys, and then we'll go over it. Then some of the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, came to him, and they asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies, leaves a wife behind, and leaves no children, his brother should take his wife, raise up the offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first took the wife, dying, and left no offspring. The second took her, he died, and he left no offspring. The third likewise, all the way to the 7th, had left her no offspring. Last of all, the woman also died. I wonder if anybody was checking the soup. That's just me. Therefore, in the resurrection, when they rise, whose wife will she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. I'll just read it all, and then we can get into the details on it. But Jesus answered and said to them, Are you not therefore mistaken? Because do you not know the Scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. But concerning the dead, that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the burning bush passage, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are therefore greatly mistaken. So now there was somebody listening to this. Then one of the scribes came, having heard them reasoning together, perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, Which is the first commandment of all? He's asking Jesus this. Jesus answered him and saying, The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So the scribe said to him, Well said, teacher. You have spoken the truth, for there is one God, and there is no other than he. And to love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your soul, with all your strength, to love one's neighbors or ourselves is more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. So as we read about this, the important things to remember is that the Sadducees, while they weren't atheists officially, I believe they functioned as an atheist because they did believe in God, but they didn't believe he had any influence on them whatsoever. There was no heaven, there's no angels, there's no place to go after you're dead. So to my mind, I guess they did believe because they believed the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what the Sadducees believed. And I guess from that matter, they're not officially atheists, but they seem to work that way to me. Because what's afterwards? Why are you living? What's the point of it all, right? Telling people about God that what's he going to do for you? Nothing. You're going to lie in the grave. But Jesus confronted them about this, because this whole thing about who's going to be the wife's husband in heaven, that's all skeptical to them. They don't believe any of this anyway, because they don't believe anybody's going to raise from the dead. So this is all just something you're throwing at Jesus to try to get him confused. Good luck with that. So then Jesus answered them, and he spoke to them about what the book that they supposedly go by, and also saying that he's God of the living, because he's God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they're still alive. So he's confronting them like I think what we need to do when someone has a question, confronting them with, like Jesus did, with the facts. And the interesting part about it is, and what I wanted to bring this up because we're going to do these studies, Jesus went into detail in explaining to them why it was that they were wrong. He went into detail. He wasn't being mean to them, but he also brought them to the truth. And he's saying, you guys know the first 5 books, right? The ones of Moses. You're not reading them very well. And he says, you are mistaken, right? But the interesting part about this all is maybe the Sadducees, maybe this didn't have any effect on them, might not have. But the interesting thing about this is there was a scribe that was listening to this in the audience. And when we're witnessing to people, especially if you're on one of the social media platforms, there's other people reading these things. The person you're talking to may not have any effect on them whatsoever. But like what Jesus said here, there was a scribe that was listening to Jesus. And the scribe may have been the Pharisee, because they do believe in the resurrection. They believe in those things. And he heard him confronting the Sadducees about their belief system, and he liked it. And he came to him and he asked him some questions himself. But what drew him in was the fact that Jesus confronted what was being said that wasn't true and gave them answers to it. And that brought about the scribe to believing that, I can believe this too. That sounds reasonable. And I think we can run into that when we're talking to people as well, that they may think, like I said, they may think that Christians believe the earth is flat. And we go to the Bible and say, okay, well, please, I don't have a Bible, but let's say I'm opening my Bible. So, okay, please show me where that is that says the earth is flat. Show me that, please, somewhere. Show me that fact. And maybe go to Isaiah where it talks about the earth being round, sits above the circle of the earth. So I think that's what our study is kind of about. Bringing about those places where we can talk with people about things that they've been told, and they may have just been said to this. Some guy may have said, well, the earth, those Christians are crazy. They think the earth is flat. And they don't know that that's not the case, but then they're going out and ask someone about it. But then you can actually talk to them about the facts that, that God didn't make the earth flat, it's round. So anyway, what's your
Well, looking at this passage, I see it in terms of what they now term first principles. In other words, what's the most foundational thing? What's the most fundamental thing? If we peel it all back, what are the most important things? And so what this course touches upon is the first principle, that there is eternal life. And so your first principle, depending on your worldview, is I'm either worm food when I die, that's the Sadducees, or no, there's an eternal realm that souls go to. That's a first principle.
right?
Okay, and so what's interesting to me is the scribe then wants to draw Jesus over to another first principle. What's the most important commandment? And so Jesus gives us the first principles of obedience to God. Love him with all you got and love other people as yourself. So this is all dealing in this realm of first principles. And so sometimes I think when we are sharing faith, we need to draw people back to what are the first principles? What are the most important things? Let's focus on that and then work from there.
Yeah.
And so that's another, I suppose, approach. In terms of our study this morning, there's so much in the skeptical realm. Well, prove this, prove this, prove this, like a city, like picking up a people group. Where I think we're going to talk about the Hittites.
Mhm.
We don't land on, I'll just name another one, the Amorites, where we went and go, now let's look at these Hittites because we think there's no evidence for that. So let's pound on that. Versus, how about all the people, places, and things that are talked about in the Bible
Mhm.
that do support it? So if somebody is trying to make a rational decision, as opposed to the stiff arm approach, then we need to take into account the full range of the evidence. And while archaeology may not have answered all the questions about some of these people groups or events in history, archaeology and other historical records have answered an awful lot about what has been said in the Bible, and these places and these people are true. It's true history. And I think that's the thing, that we don't want to get sucked into some of these questions where there is no answers. Let's focus more on, hey, look at all the answers that we do have.
Right. And there's some things that the archaeology can't demonstrate. I mean, the conversation we're having, there's going to be no record of that other than if we write it down, right? So there's not everything that it can, but what can be shown, I think, is really convincing. I think it's like what J. Warner Wallace talks about, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And when you line things up um, with the biblical narrative and how it proceeds along, which I think we're going to get into here with the prophecy and things like that. But as it proceeds along, you can tell that the document was written as it's written and by the people that wrote it, because they only talk about things that maybe are coming to place now, but they also give prophecies that come true. Now, when they said those things, like when Isaiah said that that the southern kingdom was going to be taken away, he didn't. Nobody knew that that was true, but he had made enough. He had made enough predictions on his own of the time frame that they said, this guy's got something going on here. He seems to be able to talk about things that are going to happen, and of course the Messiah in 53. But those are the things I think that matter. And with a skeptical society like we're talking about, maybe all this stuff it's got a lot of detail, and I love the detail. Me personally, I like detail, but maybe all this can't be used. But if somebody was to bring up something like, well, why do you believe the Bible is true? There's a lot of skeptics that don't. And you could generate a conversation with that. Say, well, a lot of the cities have been found by archaeology, and they're around when they're supposed to have been around when they're talking about these things. And does that help you any with any of your questions? Um, I believe there is some place for that. But as a lot of the people that share, evangelists will say, try to figure out where your guy is first. Don't go in whether the Hittites existed. If maybe he's asking, what do I do? Like Johnny asked me earlier, something about personal life, and going into all that stuff is pointless. Got to find out where your person stands. For example, if you're going to talk to a Mormon, there's really no reason to talk to a Mormon about whether God exists or not. We have that already.
Right.
Yeah, that's not going to be something we have to go into. But from that, you want to take on the one on Corinth, and then I'll do the Laodicea one.
Sure. Well, Corinth is important because it's talked about so much, and I didn't know if you wanted to review any of these Bible references, but
Yeah, sure. Let's do so.
um, I think this Acts 18, let me go ahead and read those. That's Acts 18, 12 through 17. This is where Paul is ministering in Corinth. It says, when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him to the judgment seat, or the bema seat, saying, This fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. And when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes, O Jews, would there be a reason why I should bear with you? But it is a question of words and names and your own law. Look to it yourselves, for I do not want to be a judge of such matters. And he drove them from the judgment seat. And so, one more verse. Then all the Greeks took Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things. And so the question is this true? Is this a historical event? And can we prove it outside of the Bible? Well, they know that there is a bema seat, and as is noted here, there's a marble platform. It was used, it was Roman, it had Latin inscriptions. Um, there is this other inscription, the Delphi Gallio inscription. It's this limestone fragment. It contains a letter from the emperor at that time, Claudius, around AD 52, and it mentions Junius Gallio, my friend and proconsul in Achaia. And so basically what we find from these things, just these two elements of archaeology, it's proving that there was this Gallio, he was proconsul, and there was a bema seat in this location,
Yeah.
all corroborating what I just read from Acts.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing about that's pretty early documentation as well, because this is happening, what, 51, 52 AD?
Right.
This is less than 20 years after Jesus crucified. Paul's out doing evangelism. They're getting mad at him, but that's pretty early, 51, 52. That's further attestation as to the fact that there was Christians out doing evangelism that early. So I think that's an interesting part as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that there is this guy, Erastus. He's mentioned in Acts 19:22, Romans 16:23, and 2 Timothy 4:20. And in 1929, they discovered another limestone, this time a paving slab near a theater in Corinth. And it says, Erastus, in return for his aedileship, laid the pavement at his own expense. Well, this Erastus was, he was a clerk or a treasurer there in Corinth. And that's what these, if you read those three verses together, take them together, that's how Paul's referring to him. Is that true? Is Paul accurately characterizing a guy? Was this guy really alive? Well, this Erastus inscription bears that out. And what's interesting is people that they were what they term this Aedile, Aedile. This is a bought and paid for position. This is something where you're getting such prominence and notoriety that you're actually willing to, essentially, it's a non-paid position you got to buy into because you want the prestige of the position.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that this pavement is dedicated to him because he shelled out money for it kind of goes to say, hey, look, he's that kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, two things centered around an important New Testament city of Corinth.
Exactly. And the same reaction that we have with Jesus being confronted of the Sadducees is the same way. We can be that way, not confrontive, but sharing the fact that these are things that are true. Now, can you get all that stuff cemented into your mind, every little detail? No, but you can get some of it. The fact that these people, Galileo and Erastus, actually are mentioned in pagan literature, that they really did exist, and further proof that the Bible is actually telling the truth about its documentation. And to me, the most important thing is if they get all these little details correct, and they're consistent with it, then, and that's not what the book's about. It's not about whether or not Corinth existed or not. It's about Jesus. And when you get all the small details right, there's no reason to think that the ones that you're actually trying to get across to people, that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, that that backs it up. If they're talking diligent and consistently about the details that are there, then why are they going to make details up about the biggest part of the event that they're trying to describe?
Can I add to
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Because one of the most important things from First Corinthians is chapter 15, where Paul talks about that Christ died for our sins. He's crucified, died, and was buried according to the scriptures, and that he rose again according to the scriptures. And so when we make the point that, hey, there really was a historical record of that city, the church in that city, Paul's ministry there. Here he wrote this important letter, and this is a statement of faith. Again, a first principle of the Christian faith is right there in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 and 4.
And that's very early as well. That's what, 36, 37, 38 AD?
Something like that,
Yeah.
right.
So it's very, very, very close to the time of the time frame.
And even skeptics like Bart Ehrman are not contesting the historicity of 1 Corinthians.
Yeah. Right, and Bart's a big skeptic. He's somebody
sure.
that if you ever ran into, he would have lots of questions to fire at you, trying to get you confused. But that wouldn't be one of them. So I'll pick up Laodicea. Interesting, Laodicea. We're going through Revelation, one of our other studies. So it's interesting that came up, that Jay used one of those cities. But Laodicea was, remember in Revelation, Laodicea is talked about as not a very inspiring place. They were not hot and they were not cold, they were lukewarm. And Jesus said, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth because you make me sick. But you think you know something and you're far from it. Now, were they Christians? I don't know, maybe they were. But Jesus didn't have so much good to say about them. But the interesting part about it is they have found Laodicea. And it was a pretty big place, and there was some churches there along with some synagogues as well. So Laodicea apparently was a Jewish destination as well, because there's synagogues there and there's churches there. And one particular inscription that has, it's called boy, that's a heck of a word, Nymphaeum?
No.
Nymphaeum? Anyway, yeah.
Nymphaeum,
Yeah.
Nymphaeum, something like that.
Yeah, Nymphaeum.
Water fountain.
Yeah, so anyway, on this thing, there's some Jewish symbols, a menorah. I don't know the other two. The shofar, I know that one's the horn that they blow, but the lulav, not sure what that is. But anyway, they're Jewish symbols, but also they're overlaid with early Byzantine Christian cross. So it's showing that the Jews and the Christians were around in that city, and that also there was churches that were set there. Apparently, 20 early Christian chapels were in Laodicea, this town that, the thing we find out about them is that they're not doing very well. But they did have churches there, and this Laodicea is well documented as existing from the first century. But also, it is interesting. I found that there's something also mentioning this guy named Vespasian. He was a Roman Caesar, Roman ruler. And Vespasian is on one of the gates. His name is mentioned on one of the gates as well. An interesting thing about Vespasian, as I found out, his son was Titus. Titus is the guy that destroyed Rome. Excuse me, not Rome. Jerusalem. Titus came in. He was the one that actually destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And Vespasian is mentioned here, and this document is figured to be around 79 AD when Vespasian is mentioned. So again, it's early attestation as to not only that Laodicea was a real city in present day Turkey, but also mentions Vespasian, which was a Roman ruler, and the fact that his son was around as well. So a lot of documentation here for the Bible's depiction of the area at that time. And like I said, there was There's also in Laodicea, they also had a council of Laodicea, I found out. And they did do this guys, maybe they got a little better, or some of the remnant did this. But the council of Laodicea they had a meeting in Laodicea of the churches in the area. And apparently maybe looks like 60, or let's see, some of the surrounding church fathers gathered in that place. I thought they said how many there were, but anyway, I don't see that now. Anyway, they came up with some of the canons of the Bible. They were talking about which ones are in, and surprisingly enough, if it was in Laodicea, which canon of the scriptures do you figure they left out? Revelation, because Revelation is not talking very nicely about Laodicea.
How fun.
Yeah, but anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, I look at that 20 churches thing. It could be that they took Jesus's word to heart.
Yeah.
And, a mid-course correction could have occurred in Laodicea.
Yes. Could be, and that would be great if it did, because, that's what God wanted. And he did mention that there were some people in Laodicea that still were his. He still had a remnant there. So when we brought it up in Charlie's study, we were talking about Laodicea, and the idea was that God was trying to get them to turn around, saying, "Come on, guys, come on back to where you're supposed to be. There are those there that know the Bible and know where you're supposed to be, and I want you to get back there, because God isn't into just condemning folks right off the bat. Thank Him, He's not like that. But He will tell you what's going on, and He will tell you what's up. And I think that again, I'll get back to that. Just me. I do think He wants us to tell people the truth as well when they're asking about questions, for us to be able to have an answer that is going to help them out with whatever difficulty they might have. So you want to take on Lystra?
Sure.
All right.
Well, Lystra is the kind of the famous place where Paul got nailed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I guess in Christian circles it would be sort of questionable, perhaps scandalous, but it was a place that Paul obviously felt very good about. It talks about in Acts 14 how there was a healing in Lystra, and importantly, what happened was they started calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, and these are Greek gods. And so that's how they could relate to this miraculous healing. They had thought that this miracle had occurred, and so therefore the gods had come down. And what happened was Paul told them, "Hey, don't worship us. What are you doing? We're just men like you." And then they basically, these Jews that had been following, they're non-believing Jews that were continually following and harassing Paul, came in there and essentially got the multitude stirred up against them. So here you have on one hand, oh, you're gods, oh no, you're men, oh no, you're not, oh now you're despicable, let's kill you. Boy, you talk about a shift in public opinion.
Yeah, this is not going well.
No, it did not go well, and so they stoned Paul, but then and they dragged him out of the city, supposing him dead. However, when the disciples, I'm now in Acts 14, verse 20, however, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and so went back in. So what's interesting then, I guess, from that standpoint, is somebody could say, well, wait a minute, did this really occur?
Mm-hmm.
Is this sounds, maybe too much to believe or whatever. Was there even a Lystra? Well, there was a Lystra. And it was there was evidence unearthed as early as 1890, and there is a inscription there that refers to the Lystra Colonia, that it was an actual Roman colony, and it right then and there it just kind of verifies that okay, there was a Lystra, that at that time it was a Roman colony. We also have, they've got a milestone in another area referring to Lystra. And then lastly, because of this notion that there were pagans there that were worshipers of Greek gods, consistent with trying to say that those two were,
Mhm.
they found foundations of temples dedicated to both Zeus and Hermes, the two very gods that are mentioned, Greek gods that are mentioned
Mhm.
uh, in Acts 14.
Right, trying to label Paul and Barnabas as those two, and they I'll give them this. At least they believed there was God. They said, well, this kind of thing happened. This has to be God that did it. Yeah, the wrong one, but the people of that time frame, I think they had a more um, maybe a clearer picture of there needs to be gods around, maybe for different reasons, but I just find it interesting that the fact that Paul and Barnabas did these things, and they wanted to assign them to Zeus and Hermes, and that's exactly what we find when we find Lystra, that they are dedicated to those Greek gods, and that's the first thing that came to mind. These are our gods that we worship right here in front of us. These two guys, and those two guys went nuts. So whoa, guys, hold on here a minute. We're not pagan here. So, and I'm quite sure that gave them the chance to talk about Christ, and of course that didn't go over well either, because they took Paul out and stoned him.
Well, and that point I think is important because it goes back to the truth of the gospel message. Here is a man stoned literally to death or virtually death. And I didn't read that, but they then fled to dirt. He walked back into the city to demonstrate, he wasn't, they didn't stop him, or
Right.
whatever his motivation
I'm
was.
still
And then
here.
they left to go to a different town. The point being is it's further proof of how Paul and the other apostles were constantly being hounded, that they were sharing Jesus to their own personal detriment. There
Yeah.
was nothing in it for them.
No.
There was nothing about the history of the early church centering around power,
Oh
money,
yeah.
success, prestige, position, none of it. These guys, to their own personal harm, kept proclaiming the Lord Jesus.
Yeah. And when you talk to skeptics about it, that's another thing they'll say. I'm glad you brought that up. Is that the church just wanted power. All they wanted to have was power. Well, if that was the case, then they took the exact wrong road to get it, because they got kicked out of the synagogues. The Jews hated them. They got kicked out of most of the Romans areas. The Romans didn't like them either, and they went around having to declare one of the Caesars gods. And this idea that they had this power trip, that's just silly. Nothing close to that case was really a factor. Now, once it came around 350 or so AD, and Constantine started listening to the Christians for whatever reason he did, they started having a little bit of power then, and maybe they got a little overboard after not having it for quite some time. But when Christians did take over, they did do some good things. They officially ended slavery. It was still around, but it was illegal at that point. Once the Christians took over, Constantine figured, okay, well, I'll listen to them, and they ended slavery. They also, during that time frame, the the people, if they had, I think it was if they had a baby that was a female, they thought it was completely worthless, and they discarded them. The Christians went around picking up those kids and raising them. So the Christians had a good influence, and by the time 350 AD or so came around, they started having some power. But during the time before that, they were on the run for their lives. They had they had to hide. They had to have their churches someplace that wasn't real obvious. They still came to worship, but they didn't do it in a profound manner, because they were after, everybody was after them, just like Paul. Well, Paul, this may have been the time when Paul said that I know someone who went to heaven, and it may have been this event when he got stoned. He actually was really dead. He went to heaven, and God sent him back. Said, no, you're not done yet. So that may have been the same instance where Paul was actually dead, came back to and said, no. Jesus said, no, we're not done yet. You're going to be fine. Go back into town and show them you're fine. these are things that I wonder how Paul felt about that. You want me to go back in town again?
Yeah, right.
God sometimes asks us stuff that we don't think is so good idea, but he's always got the reason to do it. Because once I would imagine that once Paul walked back into town after just being stoned, and stoning was not. You see some pictures of it if you look it up. It's a really violent procedure. I've seen places where they dug the person down to the point where they put their arms inside the dirt so they couldn't defend themselves, and they started throwing rocks at them. That was the stoning that I saw, and there's probably other versions of it. But once that happened and the person was dead and he walks back into town, these guys are going to start thinking, well, maybe he's got something going on here. He was the one who killed this lady. We tried to kill him for it, and now he's doing it. I don't know what happened to Conium after that, but there could have been some sort of revival there just because Paul took the stoning and walked back in. Anyway, yeah, it was interesting. Very interesting stuff. So I'll take the Ephesus part because I really thought this was kind of interesting. So Ephesus is one of the major cities in the Bible. As a matter of fact, one of the letters Paul wrote was to the Ephesians. So this is a major city. It's a huge city, very, very productive city. And they had theaters. They had all the stuff that you would expect to have with a big city. And Ephesus is mentioned several times in the Bible as being around. But the inscriptions that they found, one in particular was interesting to me. There's the major center of worship and the Temple of Artemis. That's all been documented that it's there. But the big ones, those seem to be. I mean, they're interesting to have those. But when they go into little detail, like this one that I'm going to talk about, the little detail seems like something even more interesting to me. Because the Temple of Artemis had been there for a long time. There's books written about it. Very famous place. And if you're writing it later, you maybe could figure out that Temple of Artemis was there then. But this thing about when Paul came into town, he started talking about the fact that these little idols that they were making, these
Right.
pagan idols of Artemis. We don't go into what Artemis looked like. It's little, almost, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that.
Talismans or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And Paul said, why are you doing these things? God doesn't live in little temples like this. And the guild got pretty mad at him because he started affecting their sales. But the interesting part is that the Bible mentions this guild. It talks about it, and there's a inscription, and 3rd century Greek inscription, 16 lines, confirming the ongoing silversmith guards and Artemis veneration, and it's 100 years after Paul. So that's a little detail that if they're picking this thing up later and talking about it, how are they going to know about this guild that's around? The only one that knows about these things are some of the only ones that are actually making it. But when the document's written and Paul mentions small details like that, I find that to be very convincing because it's not something that if you're going to make it up, you're going to know anything about this guild. If you didn't go there and have this thing actually happen to you.
Right.
But interesting after this also is the fact that Paul went to this place called Tyrannus, a lecture hall, and was owned by this guy named Tyrannus. And it's mentioned in Acts 19:9, and where Paul went in and taught for a couple of years. Well, I did a little research on this lecture hall, and what was interesting about this lecture hall was this was a protected place for debate, and Paul, after being beaten up and all the rest of it, went there for a couple of years. Not surprising. He could actually go someplace where he could actually talk to people and not get stoned over it. So that's kind of what the Tyrannus part was. I think Paul went there just because he said, okay, I can go here. I can talk to people about God and not have rocks thrown at me. Just seems like an interesting spot. But they have found archaeological evidence of it. The Australian Archaeological Institute uncovered a fragment of Greek inscription talking about this place. They use some interesting words there that I can't pronounce. But anyway, it's basically saying that Tyrannus was the owner of this, and he was a person that spoke a lot, an orator that spoke a lot about it. So yeah, anyway, I thought that Ephesus they found a lot of the details that are mentioned in the Gospels about it and in Paul's visits as well. but not the Gospels, but Paul's visits. And then also this this idea that the fallen from heaven. I was kind of interested in that. What can you tell us about that, Jay?
Well, this has to do with this goddess Diana,
Yes. Okay.
and this is where the city clerk was talking about trying to calm the crowd down because they were all yelling
Yes.
for 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians,"
Mm-hmm.
and this is from Acts 19, chapter 19, verse 35. And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and of the image, um, and of the image which fell down from Zeus?"
Yeah.
So there was some historical event in that city where they believed that an image of the goddess of Diana had come down to them from the heavens.
Yeah. More pagan stuff. Yeah.
Right, and it was an event, or at least a fable,
Mm-hmm.
and all the details I think have been lost to antiquity.
Right. But it mentions that fact as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important too because Paul was able to do quite a bit of success because if you look at this on this Tyrannus thing, and this is Acts 19, verse 10, it says, "And this," meaning his teaching, "continued for 2 years, so that all who dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, both Jews and Greeks." And so this was fundamental to the spread of Christianity in Asia and certainly in the world, that
Yeah.
he was able to have 2 years of ability to show people how the Old Testament was fulfilled in Jesus Christ. I mean, this is apologetics at work for 2 years
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Exactly. Because he was able to actually get his points across, and this was apparently a major place of learning. This was a site of learning for the Greeks, and a lot of Greek people came there to this spot because well known, well documented, and like I said, you could go there, you could speak, and nobody's going to try to kill you, like Paul had experienced along the way. Maybe when it came there healing, and maybe had some of the scars still left from him, and that fact that he was stoned to death and he came walking back in, that may have spread around. So Paul may have had some notoriety in getting people to come and listen to him.
Well,
And again,
for us now, now we're struggling, not so much now, but we had this censorship issue, this deplatforming thing. And so, we don't know what the future holds, but I think the message for, the apologists today is we need to be eyes open for where we have a platform to be able to get the word out.
yes, yeah, exactly. And Turning Point USA has been very about that, making sure they can get the message out. And as Charlie did, and unfortunately for him, he gets to go to heaven. We get to be without him. But that was his point. He came out and he started talking to people about how the Bible is true and the documentation. But he would tell people, I am a Christian. I'm a born again Christian, and I believe that to be true. And if somebody would ask him questions about it, and he would have the answers. And that's something that I really admired about Charlie, was that he had those things. He'd studied them and was ready for those questions. And again, maybe the person confronting him, just like with the Sadducees and Jesus talking to them, maybe the person confronting you and being resistant, maybe that's not what the message is for. Maybe the message is for someone as a scribe who was standing on the sidelines, that Jesus knew about it, but we don't. But standing on the sidelines just reading, and they're not going to respond to you. But getting the truth out is where I think it comes down to us, is to say the truth, give out the documentation that we do have, help people understand it's not a fantasy, it's not mythical, it's real, and this can affect people. So, and it's not necessarily the one you're talking to. They might be totally resistant, but somebody that's reading it and not commenting is going to have the same reaction that the scribe did.
Yeah, another gospel says a lawyer was testing him. And like that's a bad thing. Well, you know what? We're told that we should be testing ourselves. We're told that our faith will be tested, and
Yeah.
testing's important. This is the scientific method. And so, the call on us, of course, uh, when we're defending our faith is be prepared for the testing.
Yeah.
Because, if we pass the test, success may result.
Yeah. You may get a scribe come up and say, I think you answered that really well. Can I talk to you about some other stuff? It was in the Bible, so it's Jesus did it. So we're following along with our Lord. Then it's something that, like I said, there's some details here that are going to surpass me. But the fact is that if you can bring the archaeology before people that are a little skeptical, it might say, what, I was doubting that, but I really would like to have a purpose. I would like to have the idea that there's an afterlife, that I'm going to live after this. And you can say, yeah, you sure are, and you just got to decide which one you want to say. But that's not the best. That's just joking. Smoking or non-smoking, but yeah, I think those things are important, and God just asks us to give out the details and give out the message, and it's up to Him for the final effect.
Right on.
So, one other thing that I did find that I thought was kind of interesting. This is just recent discovery, and in Egypt, there's actually two of them. I think I talked about one of them before. The I pronounced this right. Ipuwer papyrus is a papyrus they found in Egypt, and it's dated to around 13th century BC, maybe 14th, and it's talking about how badly Egypt and the Egyptian people were dealing with things, that these plagues were hitting them. And this is a document written at the time or near the time that talks about this. Now, when I looked up Ipuwer papyrus on Google search, the first thing it said was there's no real documentation that the plagues ever happened. That's what the first thing they said was. But then they also mentioned, well, there is this Ipuwer papyrus that seems to mention something about it. But the first thing they wanted to say was they didn't know it. There wasn't anything that really documented it. So, and if you want to look it up, it's Ipuwer papyrus, and I've read it, and it's very interesting because this guy is talking about how the darkness was affecting the Egyptians, how the river turned red, all these things documenting exactly what the Bible was talking about. But you don't hear much about this if you were papyrus, because it's going against the secular notion that the Jews were never there. Then this other thing that I found, I think they found rather recently, there's an inscription in some place called the Sowed Temple in Sudan. It was built to honor Amon-Ra, which is also in the Bible, one of the pagan gods. But it also contains the oldest known reference to Yahweh. In the inscription dating of the reign of Pharaoh Antwerp III in the 15th century BCE, that's just before the Exodus happened, mentions a group of Sashu, nomads, of Yahweh, providing evidence of the people that worship God existing in the region at that time. Now, this is Sudan, which is presently not Egypt now, but it's talking about people that worshiped Yahweh, and there were tribes that wandered, and that's exactly what the Jews were doing. So these are things that promote, again, the fact that the entire document has backup for it, and that we can we can talk to people about it and say, well, and they say, well, how do you know that the plagues ever happened? Well, there's this pagan writer, Ipuwer papyrus, that talks about it at the time. So those are kind of historical facts that we can use in case folks are a little skeptical.
Well, and it just is a reminder that the details in the Bible, the people, the places, the events are so specific. And when you compare that to other religious texts, these other texts just come up short.
Yeah.
And this is another reason why when we get these false gospels, they're light on facts and heavy on philosophy, if you will.
Right.
The Bible just stands out in the historicity of it. And so, as an apologist, I think we just need to just keep focused on that there is this mountain of, of, of archaeological and other historical evidence that corroborates all these very specific people, places, times, events that are listed in both the Old and the New
Right.
Testament.
And for example, if you pick up the Book of Mormon, for example, we went over some of that here in our study. If you pick up the Book of Mormon talks about all these cities that are supposedly in North America and South America, all these vast populations that are there. And you know how many of them they found? None, not a single one. So, and the interesting thing is that when they start talking about Christians and having, the lack of evidence, they sometimes will say that Mormons are Christians. And when they look into that book and they say, well, none of this stuff's ever been found, this is where they get that idea. Well, religion is, it's fantasy. And when somebody says that to me, I say, well, I don't know about a religion. Some religion is fantasy. You're right. I won't mention the Mormons, but I'll say something like that. So, but I'm not religious. I don't deal with religion. I have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and I'm a Bible. I'm a Bible person. I believe what the Bible tells me. And when I go to the Bible and I see things that are mentioned, I know that they're there because they find stuff like they now know where the real Mount Sinai is. It's in Saudi Arabia. That's a big deal because if it really is in Saudi Arabia, then it's exactly where the Bible seems to say it is, because they did cross the Red Sea, and now it's in Saudi Arabia, exactly where it's supposed to be. And you can take tours there. Unfortunately, it's really expensive to get there, but it's got all the stuff that marks out the Bible as Mount Sinai, as the place it really is. The cave that Elijah went to is there. The little rocks with feet on them, because God said, wherever you mark your feet, I'm going to make that for you. So the Jews started writing their feet on rocks. Interesting. But I mean, the split rock at Horeb's there. Everything's there, and it's again just the documentation. That's pretty darn early. That's Exodus. Pretty darn early in the story where you come up with evidence like that.
Right.
So
very cool.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much covers what I had in mind. Anything else you wanted to add there, my friend? No?
No, I think
All right.
that's good.
Well, we ended about 15 minutes early, so we got time for questions. Mr. Dirk.
I gotta mention it's about Jim Warner Wallace said something about casual reference versus specific reference, and that casual reference is something that you would do in normal discussion, normal speech. You mentioned like, City of Redlands, when Paul Barrett was mayor of the city of Redlands, this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But if you get into too much specifics, Paul Barrett, who was the mayor of Redlands, born at Norton Air Force Base, graduated from Redlands High School in 1972, with Brian Billick, who won the 2001 Super Bowl with the Ravens, then you're getting into way too much detail, and he says that's where you see that it's faked.
Mm-hmm.
That's why all this stuff we talked about in here, Paul mentions this guy, but he doesn't go into a huge amount of detail about who he was, how he got the position, any of that.
Right.
Which would tend to say that it was done afterwards and faked. But when you're just mentioning it in a casual conversation, a specific thing, casual conversation, yeah, say hello to this guy, who is the council there. Okay.
Yeah.
And that really tends to lend more proof and evidence to that being true.
Right.
And real. And then we have, of course, then you can find the archaeological evidence.
You can, and interesting that it's recent too. It's not, there's this idea with the historical events that the longer the distance is that is written about, the further the distance away, the more likely it is for legend to grow. 500 or 600 years of time passing from the event allows for legend to grow. In other words, people talking about it and adding something to it.
Right.
That's the time for legend to grow. That's why I thought it was important that this part about Corinth, they're talking about a very early time frame of 51 to 52 AD. That's less than 20 years after Christ was crucified, that we got documentation of Paul talking about it. And there's no way legend can grow in that period of time, because the people that are there, legend thinks that if it's, Christ died at 33 AD, which we think is pretty close. Anyway, if you're talking about it in 500 or 600 or 700 AD, and you're talking about that event, people can say, well, you didn't see it. How do you know any of that happened? But when you have something that's as close as what these things are, there's people still alive that saw these things. And that's one of the major reasons why to me, the New Testament is such an impact, is you don't have anybody saying that it didn't happen.
Right.
For how long? 1800 years? There's talking about that span between anybody saying that it really didn't happen. All throughout that time, when Muhammad started talking about Islam, he mentioned Christ more often than Muhammad's mentioned. So again, even 600 years later, they're talking about Jesus. Now, they don't have him as the right person, but they are talking about him. So the fact that we have these close documents that show the testimony that the apostles were doing, that we have close documentation of what they were doing, is very important.
Well,
So,
in the book of Acts, following up what Dirk said, is that, we know from Paul's letters that Luke, who wrote Acts, is traveling with Paul.
Yeah.
And so it's quite likely that very close to this Lystra thing, Luke wrote this down.
Yeah.
And other parts of the book of Acts could have been as events were unfolding. Luke was, I kind of think of him as more like a journalist, where he's trying to report. And so, of course, if he's going to report an event in Lystra, he's not going to go into the details like Dirk was in his example. He's just going to mention, this guy was proconsul there, and and move on.
Because that's not Paul. That's not what Luke's trying to get across.
Right. He's
trying
just
to
trying to report an event, basically.
Yeah.
And I think it gives it a lot of credibility.
Yeah. Right.
Well, to get back to what you just said about Christ and his existence, the early Jews and early Romans never denied that he lived, that
Right.
Jesus was alive. They were denying that he was the Son of God.
Yeah.
Denying that claim. They didn't deny that. They didn't never deny his body disappearing. They didn't deny any of that.
Right.
So that all happened because they would have come out right away and said, "No, here's his body," and paraded around, as we mentioned before. But they didn't. So they didn't deny his existence at all. They denied that his body disappeared. They just tried to make up stories about, this is how it must have happened.
Right.
They didn't even deny the miracles.
No, they actually abided with him. They just blamed him. They said Jesus did the miracles by the powers of Satan.
So
correct.
They didn't deny the miracles.
We have today.
Yeah. Yeah.
First there was nothing, then it exploded.
Yeah. Yes. That's a miracle for sure. So yeah, any other questions? I think Daniel or Linda, go ahead.
You mentioned Ruach in Laodicea, that's one of the
Yes.
symbols.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Those are palm branches, myrtle branches, and
Oh, okay.
willow branches that they used in Sukkot, the Feast of
Sukkot.
Booths.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Is that the Feast of Booths?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just adding to that comment, I did send to both you and Daniel images of what the love is.
Oh, okay. Cool. Actually, we went when Charlie and I and a bunch of others went to Israel together. We went there during Sukkot, and they were carrying around palm branches, and I could not figure out what the palm branch thing was. So I was in some place, and a guy came by with one, and I asked him, "So what's the deal with the palm branch?" It was something they did as a ceremony. It's a harvest thing. That's what the whole Sukkot's about, is harvest. And he said this, we're just celebrating the harvest, and we carry the palm branches around. Real nice guy. He sat and explained to me, Jewish guy talking to some silly Christian, which I'm sure that's what he knew I was. But he was friendly enough to just tell me all about it. He said, "Yeah, we do this as a celebration. This is one of our biggest celebrations is Sukkot, almost as much as Passover. But we really like it because it's the time we can feast, because there are feasts are going on there. I have videos of these guys dancing in this little library that's next to the Western Wall, and they're just having a celebration. And I see those guys doing that, and I think, they have joy. They really do have joy. The Jewish people have a joy that's inbred in them, and certainly comes out when these festivals are going on. They still remember them, because Sukkot was something that celebrated the Jews being in the wilderness with tents, and they're still celebrating. That's 2,000 years ago, or 1,500. Yeah. Anyway, 3,500 years ago. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so yeah, Daniel, I think you had a question.
So, of the four cities we went through, the one that I just kind of stands out to me is Corinth, because Corinth is an opportunity, in my experience, to reach out to the unbelieving world. Because Israel and even the Turkey and some of the other Bible lands, it's basically Christians and Jewish people who are interested in going there and exploring it. But Corinth, because it's part of Greece, Greece is more on the itinerary of a lot of secular tourism too.
Mhm.
So, someone who's an unbeliever, but they're well traveled, they will often go to Corinth, or they'll go to Athens, or they'll go to some of the Greek cities, the Greek islands, and all
Mhm.
that. It's part of the
Oh, it's gorgeous.
cruise ship lines and all that, and so there's kind of an inroad there. I feel.
Yeah, it's gorgeous there. It's really a pretty place. Yeah, they got lots of monuments that have been there for. Parthenon's been there for what, 3,500 years or something? The Greek Parthenon, maybe not quite that long, but an awful long time. Find some very cool relics there. So, anybody else? Questions? Comments? Donuts?
Do we want to mention the events coming up?
Yeah. Do we get handouts for those?
It's over on the table by the door.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a guy that I really like listening to. His name is Jason Miles, and he's a astrophysicist PhD from Caltech, I think, somewhere. Anyway, and I really like his approach to things. I kind of side with him over what Dr. Ross talks about. Anyway, he's just got a different viewpoint. I think it's really interesting. It's going to be at Calvary Chapel, Rialto, so it's not very far away, and it's this coming Wednesday at 7:00. Jason's going to go through his presentation, and if you get a chance to go, I think you'll really, really like it. He's got some humor, so it's not all just data, but he's got an interesting outlook on things that I think thinks really it would really be something you could take in, think about, consider.
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
and it's very timely because of the James Webb Telescope discovering, like when you and I were talking before we started, that it's identified galaxies that are more formed than the Big Bang model predicted. It's got heavy elements, which these outlying universe edge galaxies have more and different minerals than they expected, not just hydrogen and helium, but other elements.
Yeah.
And then also the existence of well-formed big black holes, which are very dense, that they did not expect that sort of density. I don't know that they even thought there were going to be black holes. And the fact that and a black hole is an object that is so dense that the escape velocity to get out of its gravitational pull exceeds the speed of light. So even light gets drawn in. Light cannot escape.
Right.
And so the fact that there's that kind of density in these edge galaxies was unexpected.
Yeah.
And I would be very interested in hearing his perspective on that issue, because that's really happening right now.
And he likes answering questions afterwards, so we can get to that. And also, what we'd like to do is see if he'll do a podcast with us, like we did it before, and have we could do a question and answer like that kind of thing, because he's studied the topic. He has different opinions than other ones do. Him and Russell Humphreys, another guy that's both of them are young earthers. That's why I like them, but they just have different perspective on things, and it's really interesting to listen how they approach things. So.
Well, and for us as apologists, this is where we need to push back on the notion that the Bible's not scientific,
right,
or that somehow science and the Bible are at odds. I mean, Jason Lyles is a guy that can explain these kind of consistencies that are important for us to keep in mind.
Right, just a different viewpoint of the same thing. Yeah. Right. So anyway, yes.
Is this a
freebie?
Good.
Yep.
Forgot about that.
I'd just like to mention one thing too.
See.
You think about the creation that God has made. Remember Voyager 1?
Yes.
Next year it will be one light day away from Earth. One more year. One light day.
One light day. Wow.
not a year, and just think how far out that thing is and how large.
Yeah, and it's incredibly distant to us,
Yeah.
but in the general scheme of things, it's a speck.
Yeah, so when you think of how distant the nearest planet or nearest solar system from us, which is measured in light years, it's just incredible the vastness of God's creation.
That's for sure. And the beauty of it as well.
Yes.
Jay was telling me about this event they have, Dark Sky
Dark Sky Festival.
Festival. It's out in the middle California Valley there in the middle, little north of Ridgecrest and Trona.
Right.
Yeah. But I guess it's, yeah. You ever been to Trona?
Unfortunately.
It's an interesting place. They got this rock, if you go out there, so I think that's not till October, if you get a chance to go to Trona, there's these rock structures they've got there that are really interesting looking.
Yeah, the Trona Pinnacles.
Yeah, the Trona Pinnacles, yeah. Interesting looking place. You ever been out to that way?
No, I've been out to the Trona cogeneration plant.
Okay. Because they got these
There's a
pinnacles.
place that you can smell well before you arrive there.
Okay, that's good. Anyway, the pinnacles are kind of interesting. They're just these weird structures that, they're in this one little spot, and then you go away from that little spot and they're gone. We don't know how they formed, but they're there. And they're really kind of bizarre looking points and stuff. So anyway, so I guess that's it for today. Thanks for coming out, guys. Let's play before we go. Thanks, Father, for this day. Thanks, Lord, for your proofs that you give us, Father, that you are real. You are involved in our lives, Father, like you were with the apostles and with Paul and with Barnabas. You were involved in their lives too, Father, but you promise us that we're the same. You want to be involved with us as well, and you want us to get your message out to those that are perishing, Father. So just give us that chance. Thank you for the gathering here today, Lord. Pray that you keep everybody that came here safe as they travel home. And we just thank you for being here with us and your Holy Spirit too. We pray these things in your name, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen.